During a moonless night stillness when darkness seems to swallow everything in sight, an unseen and unsettling presence moves stealthily through the neglected corners of an ordinary house. Even though the silence appears complete, an underlying tension persists, a force that cannot be seen but is profoundly felt in every breath and in every shadow that silently stretches along the hallways. You may have experienced this sensation before, even if subtly, a shiver creeping down your spine when you notice that something has shifted, accompanied by the instinct that unseen eyes are fixed upon you, silently watching and waiting. The feeling that there is more hidden within the darkness than our understanding allows, something beyond perception, is difficult to articulate, yet it's a recognition shared by many at some point in their lives. The young protagonist of this story leads a daily routine that, on the surface, appears mundane. It is a pattern defined by minor details, familiar habits, and moments of silence that gradually grow more oppressive. Over time, she begins to realize that the sounds surrounding her are not simply figments of her imagination or everyday noises. Invisible footprints seem to mark her path, and faint whispers echo repeatedly, resembling a trail she cannot follow to its end. The feeling of being watched, of someone or something playing games with her, intensifies as night falls, transforming into an almost tangible presence, a threat she cannot see but feels intensely in her skin and soul. What makes this story even more unsettling is the lack of a clear explanation for what she is confronting. There are no traditional monsters or obvious apparitions. The horror does not stem from a clearly defined supernatural presence, but from a silent oppressor that infiltrates her mind, memories, and the very core of her perceived reality. Each creaking door, each shattered mirror, each shadowy glance that seems to slip from unseen eyes deepens the feeling that secrets have been buried for decades, concealed beneath layers of fear and silence. These secrets, if exposed, could not only shatter her understanding of the world but also threaten the very sense of her identity. The night transforms into a kind of trial, a journey where time appears to warp, and tangible reality blends seamlessly with the realm of imagination. She begins to doubt her senses, questioning even her reflection in the mirror, afraid that what she sees might be a lie or a mask concealing something far more sinister. Every step she takes feels like a dance with the unknown, a silent struggle against an adversary that in truth is herself, or perhaps the parts of her she refuses to acknowledge. The fragile boundary separating sanity from madness gradually dissolves as she confronts a harsh reality. The real terror isn't lurking in the shadows, but resides in the neglect of small details, in missed chances to confront the greatest threat, her own negligence and unacknowledged fears. As night reaches its peak, she is confronted with a revelation that completely upends her understanding of everything. Something has been present all along, concealed within the very foundation of her home, embedded in the story she was told and buried in the memories she tried to forget. A quiet betrayal, a truth hidden beneath layers of silence and fear, now crashes into her awareness in a brutal and unbearable manner. At that moment, she realizes that her fear does not stem from what she saw, but from what she overlooked and was unable to perceive. The seemingly harmless shadow transforms into a creature that feeds on fear, doubt, and betrayal, an entity that only grows stronger in neglect and inattention to the darker aspects lurking beneath the surface. Everything seems on the verge of collapse. The fabric of reality unravels, boundaries of what's attainable blur, and she finds herself entangled in a web woven with ancient secrets, truths that once uncovered cannot be undone. The silence, once perceived merely as the absence of sound, transforms into a weapon, an ominous force that echoes in her mind louder than any scream or noise ever could. Every shadow, every quiet moment, now appears to conspire against her, building an environment thick with a tangible, almost alive tension. As the first light of dawn begins to break, she realizes that the true horror has not ended. It has merely shifted form, lurking in the darkness, silent and still, waiting for her to look in the wrong direction or to make a mistake that could unravel everything she holds dear. When contemplating the true essence of the terror embedded within this story, it becomes evident that the complexity lies in the intersection of perception and memory. It is not merely a presence that manifests in darkness, but a force that feeds on the fragility of the human mind, gradually eroding the foundations of reality with the subtlety of an unseen corrosion. This intangible entity, by its very nature, represents a projection of our inability to accept what remains beyond our understanding. Similar to a shadow stretching across a wall beneath a faint lamp, it enlarges in the absence of light, gaining strength through the ignorance cultivated by avoiding confrontations with the unsettling truths of our past. When reflecting on this, it is crucial to acknowledge the significance of emotional neglect and the suppression of painful memories. Often what we overlook, an unspoken word, an unclarified doubt, a hidden secret, ends up becoming a space where uncontrollable forces develop. This concept resembles a crack forming at the bottom of a tranquil pond, initially barely noticeable, but over time, it enlarges and evolves into a fracture capable of threatening the entire structure's stability. Each extended period of silence, each ignored question, contributes to a buildup of energy, a force that, once activated, knows no bounds and gradually erodes the very core of our emotional resilience. Building upon this idea, another critical aspect is how fear manipulation functions as a covert weapon, subtly shaping perceptions and distorting the sense of reality. This unseen force, by targeting our deepest insecurities, can turn a familiar environment into a maze of falsehoods. Picture a home that appears warm and inviting yet contains doors leading to endless hallways, where each step uncovers a new layer of psychological terror. The manipulation operates through the delicate nuances of small details. A door that seems locked but, upon closer inspection, reveals an unclaimed exit, or a shattered mirror reflecting a twisted version of oneself, symbolizing unresolved past traumas along with the fragmentation of one's identity. Another unsettling aspect lies in how the story unveils that the true adversary is not an external force, but an inner strength expressed through fear, guilt, and remorse. When the main character realizes that the most destructive threat comes from within, she faces a universal truth that many shy away from. The greatest darkness resides in the soul itself, fueled by choices she has made or ignored. This insight shifts the entire nature of the horror, turning it into an internal struggle for sanity, where each thought can become both a weapon and a prison. The most cruel betrayal is the one she inflicts upon herself by neglecting warning signs or shutting out the subtle voices whispering that something is wrong, until the burden of her neglect becomes overwhelming and impossible to bear. Furthermore, it is crucial to observe how human emotions such as fear, anxiety, and despair serve as catalysts for this silent entity. These feelings not only amplify our sense of vulnerability, but also create a fertile ground for the emergence of dark forces. Much like a plant requiring rich soil to thrive, the shadow feeds on our most primal emotions, evolving into an almost tangible presence that lingers within the atmosphere of the home. In a grim dance, each negative feeling strengthens this entity, spiraling into a vicious cycle where fear breeds further fear, and doubt fuels more doubt. Consequently, terror ceases to be merely an external reaction and begins to act as an internal force that influences thoughts, behaviors, and perceptions, almost becoming an extension of oneself. Ultimately, this understanding helps shed light on why the most profound fears are often those that remain unseen, but deeply felt. Such fears do not require frightening visions or grotesque appearances. Instead, their core lies in doubt, in the uneasy feeling that something is amiss, and in the uncertainty between what is genuine and what is illusion. Recognizing this reveals that the greatest challenge isn't avoiding the external manifestations of shadowy figures or eerie sounds, but rather acknowledging the internal fractures that allow this darkness to infiltrate. It is this vulnerability, the overlooked small omissions, that creates openings for horror to silently grow until it becomes an almost tangible presence. Ultimately, real terror stems from the realization that what frightens us most is frequently not what is visible, but what we fail to see due to our own blindness and neglect. When contemplating the essence of fear lurking in the shadows, it becomes clear how its presence manifests in ways that go beyond mere discomfort. At times, fear transforms into an almost tangible force, permeating the atmosphere like thick fog that suffocates the surroundings, blurring any sense of lucidity. This unseen mist is not solely symbolic. It is a sensory experience that evokes feelings of entrapment, where each breath feels heavier and every heartbeat deafening. In such a state, the mind becomes a battleground, with thoughts intertwining with distorted images, weaving a personal narrative fueled by anxiety that struggles to find a logical escape. An additional critical aspect lies in how fear penetrates daily routines, turning ordinary tasks into moments of nearly unbearable tension. Consider a simple act such as opening a door, which becomes imbued with symbolic meaning. Each movement fraught with suspicion, every creak of the door affirming that something is amiss. These minor actions, once performed instinctively, evolve into milestones of a silent pursuit, an unceasing vigilance that influences one's perception of both space and time. The home, meant to serve as a safe haven, transforms into a maze of frightening possibilities, where every corner may conceal a threat. And silence is not just the absence of sound, but a sign of something unspoken, felt rather than seen. Within this viewpoint, fear also manifests as a sense of losing mastery over one's body and mind. As anxiety heightens, it triggers an internal imbalance, resembling a person standing on a tightrope, unable to steady themselves. This feeling of fragility is amplified when one notices that their perceptions are distorted. Shadows may appear as human figures, sounds could be perceived as threats, and the inner voice becomes a tool of doubt. Consequently, fear transitions from a transient emotion to an overpowering presence that infiltrates every aspect of consciousness, undermining confidence in one's thoughts and fostering a persistent sense that danger lurks nearby, even in the absence of any tangible threat. Another element that intensifies this ongoing sense of threat is the subtle manipulation of time, which warps in almost imperceptible ways. Moments of tranquility seem to stretch endlessly, as if the clock itself is decelerating, while the hours drag on with agonizing slowness. Conversely, there is also a perception that time accelerates, creating a distressing confusion between past, present, and future. This temporal disorientation serves as a potent tool, heightening feelings of helplessness by giving the impression that the nightmare will never end. Consequently, the mind spirals into a loop where each thought feeds into the growing fear, establishing a vicious cycle that persists in the absence of any clear escape. Furthermore, there exists an experience often overlooked but essential for understanding the depth of terror, the disconnection from one's own identity. As anxiety intensifies, it can lead to a feeling of estrangement, as if the individual is observing themselves from outside their body, unable to identify their genuine emotions or reactions. This detachment from the core self heightens vulnerability, as the person begins to doubt their feelings, questioning whether what they perceive is truly real or just a manifestation of a disturbed mind. In such a state, the line between internal sensations and external reality blur, resulting in an overwhelming sense of emptiness and an impression that the threat surpasses logical explanation, a force beyond control or comprehension. In this framework, fear evolves into an entity that feeds off emotional chaos, quietly expanding within the crossroads of the mind and spirit. It does not require visual cues or physical signs. Instead, its existence is felt deep within the soul, like an open wound that never fully heals. By understanding this dynamic, we recognize that the true strength of this force lies in its ability to manifest as a shadow haunting the mind, an ever-present figure that grows stronger as we neglect or deny it. Consequently, fear becomes a twisted mirror, reflecting our vulnerabilities and oversights, urging us to face what we so often choose to hide in the darkest corners of ourselves out of fear of confronting it. When exploring the connection between fear and quiet neglect, it becomes essential to understand that this emotion often transforms into a collective memory that subtly infiltrates the fabric of the space we inhabit. It is not merely a fleeting response, but a persistent presence embedded within the emotional architecture of a home, leaving traces on the walls, the floor, and even in the invisible cracks that go unnoticed. Every overlooked detail, a door needing fixing, a window left unlocked, a piece of furniture that should be discarded, serves as a fragment of a larger puzzle. When assembled, these pieces portray a distorted image of the environment itself. Such neglect, frequently driven by automated routines, permits dark forces to quietly establish themselves, growing stronger in the absence of active vigilance or mindful care. In this context, neglecting attention resembles an open wound that, if left untreated, becomes a source of infection. Much like an invisible infection that spreads and impairs essential functions. The silence we allow to persist within our inner world cultivates a fertile environment for fear to grow. What initially appears trivial, such as a fleeting doubt or a sensation of unease, gradually develops into a looming shadow that extends and invades every aspect of perception. It is akin to a virus subtly spreading through the mind, distorting sensations and fabricating frightening illusions where normalcy once existed. Consequently, what could be dismissed as mere paranoia evolves into a destructive force that undermines emotional stability, fed by a neglect that seemed harmless at first but proves to be profoundly damaging over time. Another critical aspect worth considering is how the lack of resolving internal conflicts intensifies this invisible entity. When we neglect our own feelings, such as resentment, guilt, or shame, they quietly accumulate, creating a kind of burden that cannot be immediately released. Instead of addressing and processing these emotions, they transform into a delayed energy, waiting for the right moment to burst forth in a more aggressive manner. Applying this to the household environment, unresolved arguments, secrets kept for years, or unspoken pain all become burdens chained to the soul's load. The more we ignore these issues, the heavier this burden becomes, turning into a mountain, an entity that grows in the absence of attention and understanding, until the pressure becomes unbearable and overwhelming. Furthermore, it is crucial to understand that emotional neglect not only facilitates the growth of external forces, but also erodes our sense of inner security. By neglecting our vulnerability, we inadvertently foster an illusion of invincibility, when in reality, we are remarkably fragile. This false sense of control prevents us from recognizing that internal cracks exist, though invisible, that can serve as entry points for forces that thrive on our deepest fears. Consequently, neglect acts as an open door, a vulnerability that, if left unaddressed, allows hidden, dangerous elements to penetrate undetected. It's akin to ignoring a tiny crack in a wall, which over time can expand into a significant opening, capable of jeopardizing the entire structure, rendering the home exposed to the elements and unseen intruders. Ultimately, this process exposes a disturbing reality. Neglecting what is unseen inadvertently cultivates a fertile ground for terror. The hidden, silent, and overlooked elements are precisely what can evolve into the most destructive force. A threat that doesn't demand dramatic appearances or grotesque displays, but exists in the void of attention. It's through negligence that fear can morph into a nearly palpable presence, intensifying in the shadows of forgetfulness fueled by our own inability to confront internal fractures. Therefore, our greatest vulnerability lies in ignoring these concealed aspects, in failing to acknowledge what lurks in the darkness, patiently waiting for the moment to become the most silent yet formidable threat we face. Reflecting on this, journey into the invisible shadows embedded within our own perceptions reveals that the complexity of fear extends beyond mere visibility or tangible reality. Every layer uncovered shows that true horror's power lies in its ability to quietly infiltrate the depths of the mind, thriving on what we ignore and refuse to confront. Just as a chain grows stronger through its interconnected unseen links, these elements come together to form an intricate web of vulnerabilities that, if left unchecked, can become inescapable traps. The subtle interplay between what is exposed and what remains hidden serves as a striking metaphor for understanding the fragile nature of our sanity in the face of forces that, by their very essence, prefer to operate within the shadows of oblivion. Within this framework, it becomes evident that negligence, that minor oversight that seems trivial in everyday life, acts as the fertile ground where the seeds of the most insidious terror are sown. Each small lapse, each unresolved doubt, serves to strengthen the foundation of a distorted reality, where cracks widen and deepen until even the core of what we consider secure begins to crumble. This process not only exposes the inherent fragility of human nature, but also highlights the crucial role that vigilance and the bravery to face darkness play in maintaining our integrity. It's akin to walking a fine line that, once crossed, transforms a familiar space into a battleground, where the invisible becomes more tangible, loaded with a threat that defies logic and control. Within this framework, the notion that fear is an entity thriving on our most basic emotions strengthens the idea that true horror extends beyond external appearances. It lies in the ability to corrupt and distort our innermost core. This force penetrates our deepest vulnerabilities, influencing thoughts, feelings, and memories in a way that fosters a profound sense of disorientation, seemingly impossible to overcome. Consequently, what initially appeared to be a mere shadow transforms into the embodiment of accumulated anxiety, an expression of the void we allow to grow when neglecting our emotional awareness. The link between internal states and external phenomena underscores the understanding that, if ignored, fear can become an independent power, crafting its own narrative at the crossroads of our flaws and insecurities. Given this understanding, the path ahead requires a cautious yet resolute focus on the cracks we often overlook in our daily routines and inner selves. It is through careful attention to these unseen details that the opportunity for resilience emerges, an ability to reverse certain tendencies that, while not entirely banishing fear, can diminish its insidiousness and reduce its potential for destructive force. Therefore, by acknowledging the complexity of what lurks in the shadows, not as an external threat but as a part of ourselves that calls for acceptance and understanding, we begin to envisage a more conscious way of inhabiting that space. It is precisely in this act of recognition and attentive awareness that the threads of a deeper story start to intertwine, illuminating what lies ahead and unveiling the truths still hidden in the darkness, quietly waiting for their moment to come to light. In the silence hidden within the shadows, we often overlook the fact that the greatest danger lies precisely in our inability to perceive what lurks in the darkness of our own neglect. It is within this forgotten space that fear takes root, feeding on minor oversights, unresolved doubts, and the secrets we persist in hiding. The true core of horror does not reside in the visible form or dramatic display of evil, but in the unsettling stillness with which we allow invisible forces to take hold within us, growing in the absence of awareness and neglecting the cracks inside that, if left unexamined, can become insurmountable voids. Consequently, this entire journey underscores that the real enemy is not external, but resides in our own reluctance to face what we cannot see, what we instinctively prefer to deny. Recognizing this dynamic challenges us to consider the significance of paying closer attention to our own vulnerabilities, to the invisible scars we carry, and to the emotions that quietly influence our perceptions. It's not enough to merely fear what manifests as shadows or noises. We must understand that genuine horror lies in our inability to see how fear infiltrates our inner core, eroding the foundations of sanity and rationality. This realization urges us to develop a quiet form of courage, a willingness to honestly examine ourselves, acknowledging that healing does not come from external confrontation alone, but from facing the cracks and fissures we often prefer to conceal. Ultimately, what truly frightens us is often what we overlook, those aspects we dismiss or ignore, believing that time or ignorance will ensure their silent presence remains hidden. Our greatest fear lies in the unseen spaces within us, the parts we choose not to confront, convinced that superficial protection can shield us from the underlying chaos hidden in our depths. Ultimately, what remains is a lesson in humility and ongoing vigilance. Being aware that fear, when left unchecked, can become the most subtle and dangerous power reminds us that true mastery is not solely about resisting our internal threats, but about learning to listen carefully to the silent voices within ourselves. By paying close attention to these inner echoes, we create opportunities to turn past sources of terror into pathways for understanding, acceptance, and healing. Courage, therefore, is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it, acknowledging its roots, subtleties, and strengths. The process of confronting what lurks in shadow requires a perseverance that surpasses superficial fear. It necessitates genuine surrender to the journey of self-discovery, where each revealed crack becomes a seed for growth and change. The true legacy of this reflection lies in the recognition that we can no longer avoid our own shadows under the illusion that they will simply vanish on their own. The only viable option is to confront them with bravery, understanding that facing our inner selves is essential for breaking free from the invisible chains that bind us. Through this process, we come to realize that the deepest fear is not an external force but a mirror reflecting our own neglect, doubts, and unspoken secrets. Therefore, the greatest triumph does not consist of eradicating the shadow, but rather in consciously coexisting with it, transforming fear into an opportunity for personal growth, understanding, and inner peace. Perhaps ultimately, this is the true essence of confronting one's darkness. Recognizing that within the shadows there also exists a light that only reveals itself to those courageous enough to seek it within. The journey begins now, through the awareness we give to the cracks we tend to overlook, the bravery to face what can no longer be ignored, and the willingness to turn fear into an ally on our path of self-discovery. After all, the greatest power lies in our ability to acknowledge the shadow without allowing it to overpower us, knowing that true illumination occurs only when we learn to embrace our darkness as part of the whole.